The photograph exists in the Milwaukee Historical Society archives, catalog number 1907 MHS 442. It shows a man of perhaps 35 years, seated rigidly before a painted backdrop of birch trees. His hands rest on his knees. His eyes look past the camera. The studio mark in the corner reads, Hartmann Sons, Milwaukee, October 1907. This is August Voss, 3 months after he walked out of the northern Wisconsin wilderness alone. The intake record at St. Mary's Hospital, dated July 18, 1907, describes him as dehydrated, suffering from exposure, and reluctant to provide testimony. A nurse's addendum, written in different ink, notes, patient becomes agitated when questioned. Physician recommends rest. He never rested from the questions, but he never answered them either. August Voss had entered the forest on June 29, 1907, as part of a 5-man timber survey crew contracted by the Consolidated Lumber Company of Wausau. The purpose was to assess timber quality in a remote tract near the Flambeau River, land the company intended to purchase. The crew consisted of Voss, the surveyor, Henrik Lindholm, the crew foreman, Peter Gottlieb and James Czerny, axmen, and a teenage camp assistant named Thomas Brandt. On July 17, 1907, August Voss emerged from the forest line near the settlement of Butternut, 18 days after he had been expected to return. He was alone. He carried nothing. His boots were torn, his clothes stained with substances later identified as mud, pine resin, and blood, not his own. The constable who first encountered him reported that Voss responded to his name but would not explain where the others were. When asked directly, "Where are the men you went in with?" Voss is said to have turned his face away and closed his eyes. A search party was assembled within hours. 23 men from Butternut and the surrounding settlements went into the forest with Voss as their guide. The expedition log, maintained by search leader William Cole, records that Voss led them to the base camp without hesitation, a clearing beside a creek 11 miles from the nearest logging road. The tents were still standing. Supplies remained organized. 3 bedrolls lay arranged as if their occupants had simply risen and walked away. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of animal predation, no bodies. Cole's report, submitted to the Ashland County Sheriff's Office on July 23, 1907, states plainly, Voss indicated the camp but would provide no account of events. When pressed, he wept but did not speak. We found no human remains and no indication of what befell the missing men. The families demanded answers. Henrik Lindholm's wife, Astrid, traveled from Wausau with their 3 children and confronted Voss outside the boarding house where he was staying. A witness, the boarding house proprietor Mrs. Eleanor Marsh, later testified that Mrs. Lindholm pleaded with Voss in Swedish and English, begging him to tell her what happened to her husband. According to Mrs. Marsh's account, given to a county investigator in August 1907, she was on her knees before him. She asked him if Henrik had suffered. Mr. Voss looked at her for a long time. I thought he would speak, but he only shook his head, not to say no, but as if he could not bear to remember. Then he walked away. She wept in the street. Peter Gottlieb's elderly mother arrived from Milwaukee. She spoke no English, only German. Voss spoke German. He did not speak to her. James Czerny's brother, a machinist from Chicago, hired a private investigator who interviewed Voss 3 times in September 1907. The investigator's summary, preserved in the Czerny family papers, records, subject acknowledges his identity and confirms he was present during the expedition. When asked what occurred, subject becomes silent and pale. Twice he appeared on the verge of speech. Both times he stopped himself, visibly distressed. I believe he possesses knowledge he has resolved never to share. Thomas Brandt, the camp assistant, was only 17. His parents were German immigrants who ran a small dairy farm outside of Rhinelander. His mother wrote letters to Voss, 5 in total between August and November of 1907. The letters survive in a private collection. Each one asks the same thing in slightly different language. Please tell us if our boy called for us. Please tell us if he was afraid. Voss never replied. The legal complications were immediate. Without bodies, no death certificates could be issued. Without death certificates, the families could not settle estates, collect insurance, or remarry. The Consolidated Lumber Company refused to pay death benefits without proof of death. The matter went before a judge. Circuit Court records from Ashland County, October 1907, show that August Voss was subpoenaed to testify at a coroner's inquest into the presumed deaths of the 4 missing men. He appeared. He was sworn in. When asked to state what happened after June 29, 1907, he sat in silence for 7 minutes by the court reporter's notation. Judge Walter Brennan warned him of contempt. Voss said nothing. The judge threatened jail. Voss looked at him and said only, "I cannot. Not, I will not. Not, I don't remember. I cannot." The judge held him in contempt, but suspended the sentence on the recommendation of a physician who testified that Voss appeared to be suffering from nervous collapse brought on by unspecified trauma. The inquest concluded without findings. The 4 men were declared legally dead in absentia 6 months later. August Voss left Milwaukee shortly after. City directories and census records trace his movements. In 1908, he lived briefly in Madison. In 1910, he was recorded as a boarder in La Crosse. By 1913, he had settled in Duluth, Minnesota, where he found work as a bookkeeper for a grain warehouse. He never married. He had no children. He attended a Lutheran church, but rarely spoke to other congregants. His landlady in Duluth, a widow named Ingrid Sorensen, was interviewed by a researcher in 1954, long after Voss's death. She recalled him as a quiet man, very clean, very punctual with rent. He read a great deal. Sometimes I would hear him walking at night, back and forth in his room, but he never disturbed anyone. In 1918, during the influenza epidemic, Voss volunteered at a temporary hospital. A nurse who worked alongside him, Edith Callahan, noted in a diary entry from November 1918, "There is a man here, Mr. Voss, who sits with the dying. He does not speak to them much, but he holds their hands. I think he has seen death before." August Voss died on March 3, 1931, in Duluth, Minnesota, of pneumonia. He was 59 years old. His belongings were few: clothing, some books, a small amount of money. Among his possessions was a surveyor's compass with the initials HL engraved on the case. Henrik Lindholm's compass. There was no diary, no letter of confession, no deathbed revelation. In his will, a single handwritten page, he left his modest savings to be divided equally among the families of Henrik Lindholm, Peter Gottlieb, James Czerny, and Thomas Brandt. The document included one sentence that was not a legal bequest. "I am sorry I could not speak. Some silences protect the living." The families received the money. None of them acknowledged it in writing. To understand what August Voss would not say, one must first understand what was never in question. The men trusted each other. The crew had been assembled by Consolidated Lumber in late May of 1907. Henrik Lindholm, age 42, was a veteran foreman who had worked timber surveys across northern Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula for nearly 20 years. Company records describe him as reliable and experienced in wilderness work. His wife Astrid's letters, preserved at the Wisconsin Historical Society, portray a man who loved his work and took pride in bringing crews back safely. "He always says," she wrote to her sister in June 1907, "that the forest provides if you respect it." Lindholm selected his crew personally. He chose men he had worked with before. Peter Gottlieb, 38, had worked under Lindholm on 3 previous surveys. A carpenter by trade, he was strong and methodical. His letters to his mother, he wrote every Sunday without fail, reveal a man comfortable with solitude, but devoted to family. On June 10, 1907, he wrote, "Henrik has asked me for another survey. 3 weeks in the woods. Good pay. When I return, we will discuss the shop I wish to open." He never opened that shop. James Czerny, age 31, was newer to survey work, but came recommended by Gottlieb. He had worked briefly as a logger before an injury to his hand limited his ability to handle a saw for extended periods. Survey work, mapping, measuring, evaluating, suited him better. His brother later told investigators that James was clever with numbers and not afraid of hard country. Thomas Brandt was the anomaly. At 17, he had no professional experience. He was hired as a camp assistant, the person responsible for maintaining the base camp, cooking, managing supplies. His father, in a letter to the Consolidated lumber company dated August 1907, explained that the job had been Thomas's first real employment. He wanted to earn money before the winter. He wanted to prove himself a man. Lindholm vouched for the boy. In a pre-expedition report filed with the company on June 20, 1907, Lindholm wrote, "Brandt is young but willing. He will manage camp duties adequately." August Voss completed the crew. He was 35, a surveyor by training, educated at a technical institute in Milwaukee. Quiet, precise, unmarried. He had worked with Lindholm twice before, in 1904 and 1906, both times without incident. Company evaluations describe his work as thorough and accurate. There is no evidence of animosity among the men, no debts, no grievances, no romantic entanglements. They were workmen brought together by employment, bound by professional competence and the basic mutual reliance required in remote country. But there was more than professionalism. A letter from Peter Gottlieb to his mother, dated June 24, 1907, 5 days before the crew departed, mentions a dinner the men shared in Wausau the night before they left. "We ate together at Henrik's home. His wife is a fine cook. We talked of the work ahead. Thomas is nervous but eager. August is as always serious, but I think he smiled when Henrik told a joke. James brought wine. We are a good crew." Astrid Lindholm, in testimony given during the inquest, recalled that evening. "They seemed in good spirits. August was always quiet, but he was not unfriendly. I remember he complimented the bread. My husband trusted him. He trusted all of them." On the morning of June 29, 1907, the 5 men departed Wausau by wagon, carrying supplies for a 3-week expedition. The supply manifest, filed with Consolidated lumber, lists standard provisions: flour, salt pork, coffee, beans, rice, sugar, tinned milk, tobacco. Also, tents, bedrolls, axes, saws, ropes, surveying instruments, medical supplies, and 3 rifles with ammunition. Standard equipment for protection against predators and for hunting game. A photograph was taken that morning. It survives in the Lindholm family collection. 5 men stand beside a loaded wagon. Henrik Lindholm, broad-shouldered and bearded, stands at the center. Peter Gottlieb and James Czerny flank him, both in work clothes, both unsmiling in the manner of men posing for cameras. Thomas Brandt, thin and boyish, stands at the edge, hands in his pockets. August Voss stands slightly apart, hands at his sides, expression neutral. They look like any work crew embarking on any job. There is nothing in the photograph to suggest what would come. The route to the survey site was well documented. They traveled north by wagon to the settlement of Butternut, arriving on the evening of June 29th. They stayed overnight at a boarding house. The proprietor, a man named Alvin Gust, later told investigators that the crew seemed ordinary. They ate, they paid, they slept. In the morning they were gone. From Butternut, they proceeded on foot along a logging road that extended roughly 8 miles into the forest. From the end of that road, they would trek an additional 3 miles to reach the tract of land they were to survey. The company had provided them with maps. Henrik Lindholm had scouted the route 2 weeks prior. The last confirmed sighting of all 5 men together occurred on the morning of June 30, 1907, approximately 2 miles into the forest. A logger named Otto Fensky, working a claim near the road, saw them pass. He exchanged brief words with Lindholm about the weather and the condition of the trail ahead. In his statement to the search party, Fensky recalled, "They looked well prepared. No one seemed ill or distressed. The young one was carrying a heavy pack and sweating, but that is normal. They moved at a good pace. After that, there are no witnesses, only forest." The plan was straightforward. They would establish a base camp near a creek marked on the company maps, a location that provided fresh water and a central point from which to conduct daily surveys of the surrounding timber. The work would take approximately 2 weeks. They would return to Butternut no later than July 15th. In his final report to Consolidated Lumber before departing, Henrik Lindholm wrote, "Crew is competent and prepared. Weather is favorable. Expect to complete survey on schedule." Everything was routine. Everything was planned. 5 men entered the wilderness with clear purpose and sufficient means. 18 days later, only one returned. And the one thing that should have been simplest, asking him what happened, became impossible. The search party found the camp on July 18, 1907, with August Voss leading them directly to it. William Cole's report describes the site in detail, and those details matter, because they are nearly all that can be established with certainty. The camp had been made in a clearing beside a narrow, fast-moving creek. 2 canvas tents stood intact, one larger tent for sleeping, one smaller for supplies. Both were properly staked and showed no signs of damage. Inside the larger tent, 4 bedrolls lay arranged in a row. One bedroll, later identified as Voss's by personal items found within, was positioned slightly apart from the others. The supply tent contained food stores still organized in their original containers. Coffee, flour, salt pork, all accounted for, all consistent with the manifest minus what would reasonably have been consumed over the first week or so of the expedition. The medical kit had been opened, but nothing appeared missing. 3 rifles leaned against the interior tent pole, fully loaded. Outside, a fire pit had been constructed with a circle of stones. Ash and charred wood remained. Cooking implements hung from a horizontal pole suspended between 2 trees. A drying rack held no clothes. A stack of firewood sat neatly piled beside the nearest tent. Cole's report notes, "The camp appeared orderly. There was no evidence of hasty departure, struggle, or violence. It seemed as though the occupants had simply walked away and intended to return. But they had not returned." The search party spread out from the camp in expanding circles, looking for any trace. They found survey markers, wooden stakes driven into the ground at measured intervals, consistent with standard timber assessment procedure. These markers extended in various directions from the camp, suggesting the crew had been conducting their work as planned. The farthest marker was found approximately 1.5 miles to the northwest. Cole's men searched for 3 days. They found no bodies, no clothing, no abandoned equipment, no blood, no signs of animal attack, no scattered bones, no disturbed earth suggesting burial or predation. They found no trail leading away from the camp, though Cole acknowledged that, in this country, a trail can disappear quickly if one does not know where to look. What they did find was a single item that appeared inconsistent with the rest of the camp's order. A surveyor's notebook, open and face down on the ground near the fire pit, its pages dampened by rain or dew. The notebook belonged to August Voss. His name was written inside the cover. Cole brought the notebook back and later submitted it to the sheriff's office. Its contents were catalogued. The first 16 pages contained standard survey notes, measurements, timber quality assessments, coordinates, sketches of the terrain. The handwriting was neat, methodical. Dates were recorded for each entry. The last dated entry was July 3rd, 1907. After July 3rd, the entries stopped. But there was something else. On the 17th page, undated, there were 4 words written in pencil. "It was my decision." Nothing more. No context. No explanation. When shown the notebook during the inquest, August Voss looked at it for a long time. Judge Brennan asked him directly, "Mr. Voss, what did you mean by this? What decision?" Voss did not answer. The search party questioned him extensively during the 3 days they spent searching. Cole's log records multiple attempts. July 18th evening, asked Voss when he last saw the others. No response. July 19th morning, asked Voss if the men left camp together or separately. No response. July 19th afternoon, asked Voss if anyone was injured. Subject shook his head but would not elaborate. July 20th, asked Voss if he could lead us to where the men might be. Subject became visibly distressed and refused. One member of the search party, a trapper named Daniel Kurtz, later told a newspaper reporter from the Ashland Daily Press, "I've seen men broken by the wilderness. I've seen men who got lost and starved and went half mad. Voss wasn't like that. He knew exactly where he was. He knew what he was doing. He led us right to the camp without hesitation, but he wouldn't tell us anything. It was like he was protecting something, or someone. The question that dominated the inquest and the subsequent investigations was simple. What happened between July 3rd, when Voss made his last dated survey entry, and July 17th, when he emerged from the forest? 14 days. 4 men vanished. 1 man silent. Theories proliferated immediately. The Ashland Daily Press, in an article dated July 25, 1907, speculated, "Foul play cannot be ruled out, though no motive is apparent. Voss himself may hold the answer, but he guards it as a miser guards gold." Some suggested the men had drowned in the creek, though the water was shallow, and their bodies would likely have been found. Others proposed they had been killed by wild animals, wolves or bears. But there was no blood, no signs of attack, and the rifles had not been fired. A more troubling theory emerged in whispered conversations recorded in letters and diaries from the period. Perhaps Voss himself had killed them. Perhaps the silence was not trauma, but guilt. But if he had killed them, where were the bodies? And why would he return at all? Why not disappear entirely, or concoct a story of accident or animal attack? And there was this. Every person who interacted with August Voss after his return remarked on his demeanor. He was not defiant. He was not evasive in the manner of someone concealing a crime. He seemed, according to multiple accounts, profoundly sorrowful. Mrs. Eleanor Marsh, the boarding house proprietor, told investigators, "He looked like a man who had lost everything, not like a man who had taken something." Dr. Harold Feldman, the physician who examined Voss at St. Mary's Hospital, wrote in his medical notes, "Patient exhibits signs of severe psychological distress. Affect is flat. Sleep is disturbed. Appetite is poor. When asked about the expedition, patient's hands tremble. I do not believe he is withholding information out of malice. I believe he is withholding it because he cannot bear to speak it." There is one additional detail from the search, a detail that appears almost as a footnote in Cole's report, but which seems significant in retrospect. Near the creek, approximately 50 yards downstream from the camp, we found a wooden cross, roughly made, stuck into the ground. No name, no inscription. Voss was asked if he made it. He nodded. Asked who it was for. He did not answer. A cross, marker of death, marker of reverence. But for whom? For one of the men? For all of them? Or for something else entirely? The search was eventually called off. No further evidence could be found. The forest had swallowed 4 men and returned only silence. The pressure on August Voss did not relent after the inquest. For months people sought him out, demanding answers, offering sympathy, threatening consequences. He endured all of it without speaking. The families never stopped asking. Astrid Lindholm wrote to him twice in late 1907. The letters are preserved in the Lindholm family papers, though there is no record that Voss ever replied. The first letter, dated September 14, 1907, is measured and pleading. "Mr. Voss, I do not write to accuse you. I write as a wife and mother who cannot find peace. My children ask where their father is. I do not know what to tell them. If you know he is dead, I accept that. But I must know if he suffered. I must know if he called for us. Please, for mercy's sake, give me something I can tell my children." The second letter, dated November 2, 1907, is shorter and colder. "You are a coward. Whatever happened, you lived and they did not. You owe them truth. You owe us truth. Your silence is cruelty." Voss kept both letters. They were found among his possessions after his death in 1931, folded and tucked inside a book of Psalms. Peter Gottlieb's mother, an elderly woman who spoke no English, traveled to Milwaukee with a translator in October 1907. The translator, a Lutheran pastor named Reverend Otto Schnell, later described the encounter in a letter to a colleague. The mother begged Mr. Voss to speak in German, the language of her childhood and his. She believed language would unlock his heart. I translated her words. "Tell me if my son is at peace. Tell me if he is with God." Mr. Voss stood before her, and I saw tears on his face, but he said nothing. She wept. She called him a lost soul. When we left, she said to me, "He carries a weight that will kill him. I pray he finds the courage to set it down." James Czerny's brother, a pragmatic man uninterested in sentiment, pursued a different approach. He hired not only an investigator but also a lawyer, attempting to compel Voss to testify in a civil suit related to the disposition of his brother's estate. The case, filed in Milwaukee County Court in December 1907, sought to have Voss declared a material witness and held in contempt until he provided testimony. The judge dismissed the case, ruling that without evidence of a crime, Voss could not be compelled to speak beyond what he had already endured at the inquest. The ruling noted, "A man's silence, however frustrating to those who seek answers, is not in itself a violation of law." But the Czerny family did not give up. The brother confronted Voss personally in January 1908 outside the boarding house where Voss was staying. A police report from that date describes an altercation in which the brother seized Mr. Voss by the collar and demanded he confess what he had done. Witnesses reported that Voss did not resist. He stood still and allowed himself to be shaken and shouted at until the police arrived. When asked if he wished to press charges, Voss declined. Thomas Brandt's parents were the quietest in their grief, but perhaps the most persistent in their hope. They were simple people, dairy farmers who spoke limited English. They could not afford investigators or lawyers. Instead, they wrote letters, 5 to August Voss, as previously noted, and dozens more to newspapers, government officials, church leaders, anyone who might help them understand what had happened to their only son. One letter sent to the governor of Wisconsin in August 1907 reads, "We are not educated people. We do not understand the law. We only want to know if our boy suffered. Mr. Voss was there. He knows. Why will he not tell us? Is this justice that a man can keep such knowledge and leave a mother and father to wonder forever?" The governor's office replied with a form letter expressing sympathy but offering no action. In March 1908, Thomas Brandt's father, Johann, traveled to Madison, where Voss had moved briefly. He found Voss working as a clerk in a grain office. According to a witness, a co-worker named Albert Lund, the father approached Voss and spoke to him in German. Lund did not understand the words, but he later told a reporter, "The old man was crying. He held Mr. Voss's hand. It was not anger, it was sorrow. Mr. Voss stood there like a statue. After a few minutes, the old man left. Mr. Voss sat down at his desk and put his head in his hands. I thought he might weep, but he did not." The public attention was relentless. Newspapers in Milwaukee, Madison, and Duluth ran periodic stories about the timber survey mystery or the man who would not speak. The coverage ranged from sympathetic to accusatory. An editorial in the Milwaukee Sentinel dated February 1908 argued, "Mr. Voss may have suffered some trauma, but his suffering does not exempt him from basic human decency. 4 families are left in agony while he lives quietly among us. Silence in the face of such pain is not a right. It is a sin." Other voices defended him. A letter to the editor from a woman who signed herself only as a nurse appeared in the Duluth Herald in 1914. "I have met Mr. Voss in the course of my work at the hospital. He is a gentleman who tends to the sick with great care. Whatever he carries alone, and it is clearly a burden that crushes him. We do not know what he witnessed. We do not know what he endured. Perhaps his silence is not refusal, but an act of mercy toward those who do not wish to know the full truth. And perhaps that was closest to the truth, because over time, a pattern emerged in Voss's behavior that suggested his silence was not simply about protecting himself, it was about protecting others. In 1909, Astrid Lindholm remarried. She wed a widower from Wausau, a man who could provide for her and her children. Before the wedding, she received a letter from August Voss. It was the only letter he is known to have sent to any of the families. It contained one sentence: "I am glad you have found peace." She later told a friend that she burned the letter immediately, but she also said this: "I think he was trying to tell me to stop looking backward. I think he wanted me to live. In 1912, Peter Gottlieb's mother died. Voss attended her funeral in Milwaukee, standing at the back of the church. He did not speak to the family, but he left an envelope with the priest, containing money, enough to cover the funeral expenses. The envelope had no note, and when Thomas Brandt's parents lost their farm during a difficult year in 1915, an anonymous payment was made to the bank that held their mortgage, allowing them to keep the land. The payment was traced years later to August Voss. He gave what he could, but he would not give them the one thing they wanted most. Even as he aged, even as the family slowly stopped asking, even as the years transformed the mystery into a historical curiosity rather than an open wound, Voss never spoke. In 1929, a young historian from the University of Wisconsin, researching disappearances in the North Woods, tracked Voss down in Duluth. The historian, a man named Philip Marsh, wrote to Voss requesting an interview. Voss declined. Marsh traveled to Duluth anyway, and met Voss at the grain warehouse where he worked. Marsh later wrote about the encounter in an unpublished manuscript now held at the Wisconsin Historical Society. I found Mr. Voss to be a man of evident intelligence and quiet dignity. He was courteous but firm. I asked him if he would consider, after so many years, sharing what he knew. He looked at me and said, "I have considered it every day for 22 years. The answer is still no." I asked if he thought the families deserved to know. He said, "They deserve peace. Truth and peace are not always the same thing." Marsh pressed further, asking if Voss felt guilt. Voss responded, "I feel many things. Guilt is only one of them." When Marsh asked what he feared would happen if he spoke, Voss said only, "I do not fear for myself." And then he ended the conversation. August Voss died quietly, as he had lived, in the winter of 1931. The Duluth newspaper ran a brief obituary noting his death and, almost as an afterthought, mentioning the unsolved disappearance of 4 men during a timber survey in northern Wisconsin in 1907, an event Mr. Voss never publicly discussed. There was no funeral service. His landlady, Ingrid Sorensen, arranged for a simple burial. A Lutheran pastor said words over the grave. No one from the families of the missing men attended. It is not clear if they were even informed of his death in time. In the years since, the case has been examined periodically by historians, true crime enthusiasts, and researchers interested in wilderness tragedies. The theories have remained largely unchanged: accident, violence, psychological breakdown, murder. Each theory has its proponents. None has definitive evidence. But what is clear, when one examines the entirety of August Voss's life after 1907, is that his silence was not arbitrary. It was deliberate, and it was maintained at tremendous personal cost. Consider what he endured: public suspicion, private anguish, legal pressure, the unending grief of families who begged him for answers. He could have spoken at any time. He could have offered a story, true or false, that would have satisfied some of the questions. He could have claimed memory loss, trauma-induced amnesia, anything that would have deflected the responsibility of knowing, but he did not. Instead, he wrote in his will, "Some silences protect the living." Protect them from what? The most common interpretation is that Voss witnessed something so terrible that speaking of it would only compound the suffering of the families. Perhaps the men died in a manner so horrific, so undignified, that to describe it would destroy whatever fragile peace the families had managed to construct. Perhaps the details were such that knowing them would be worse than not knowing. But there is another interpretation, suggested by the strange phrase in his surveyor's notebook: "It was my decision." A decision implies choice. A decision implies agency. What if the men did not simply die? What if they made a choice, or Voss made a choice, that resulted in their deaths? The medical supplies were untouched. The rifles were loaded and unfired. There was no evidence of animal attack or external threat. The camp was orderly. The men had simply gone. What if they went willingly? What if they went together? And what if August Voss, for reasons that can only be speculated upon, stayed behind? Or what if the opposite is true? What if the men decided something and Voss refused, and his refusal meant he survived while they did not? What if his decision was to not join them in whatever they chose to do? There are scenarios where such things become imaginable. Desperation, injury, limited resources. The wilderness is indifferent to human life. Survival sometimes requires terrible calculations. Perhaps the men faced a situation where not all could survive. Perhaps choices were made about who would try to make it out and who would not. Perhaps Voss was chosen to live or chose himself, and that choice, however rational or necessary, was something he could never reconcile. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. The cross he placed near the creek suggests reverence. The money he sent to the families suggests remorse or responsibility. The care he took with the dying during the influenza epidemic suggests a man familiar with loss and determined to honor it. But the silence, the absolute unyielding silence, suggests something else. A conviction that speaking would cause more harm than good. Philip Marsh, the historian who interviewed Voss in 1929, reflected on the encounter in his unpublished manuscript. I have thought often about what Mr. Voss said to me. Truth and peace are not always the same thing. At the time, I thought it was evasion. Now, after years of studying human tragedy, I wonder if it was wisdom. There are truths that serve no purpose but to wound. There are facts that destroy without enlightening. Perhaps Mr. Voss understood this in a way most of us do not. In the end, what remains is this. 5 men went into the forest. 1 came back. 4 families spent the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their loved ones. And 1 man spent the rest of his life refusing to tell them. Was his silence cruelty or kindness? Cowardice or protection? The answer depends on what you believe about the nature of truth and the obligations we owe to the dead and the living. August Voss believed he owed them silence. He kept that debt until his last breath. The historical record ends here. The files are closed. The case remains unsolved. The forest keeps its secrets, and so did the man who walked out of it alone. We will never know what happened in those 14 days. We will never know what August Voss saw, or did, or chose. We will never know if the men suffered, or if they went peacefully, or if they went at all, in the way we imagine. We know only that 1 man carried the weight of their absence for 24 years, and that he judged the burden of silence to be lighter than the burden of speech. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps some things should remain unspoken, not because they are too small to matter, but because they are too large to bear. The silence of August Voss was not emptiness. It was full of everything he would not say, and in that fullness, the mystery remains, forever implied, forever unanswered, forever resting in the place between what we know and what we can never know. The forest does not explain itself. Neither did he.